I was never really a Disney kid growing up. I mean, sure, I love the 2D movies like Jungle Book and Lion King, but I could never get into most of their shows. This is probably the first time I'm confessing this in public, by the way, so I expect some of my friends to flame me. But DuckTales, Darkwing Duck,
Let's get dangerous.
Chip and Dale, and the rest of them always felt a bit too serious for me. I much preferred the silly cartoons, and I felt like the Disney shows told a continuous story which created a barrier to entry. Like, how am I supposed to know how Darkwing Duck learned how to untie shoelaces? These shows were impenetrable. Okay, I kid. But whether true or not was irrelevant. Because of this perception, I was more of a Warner Bros. And Looney Tunes kid because you didn't need to do any homework to understand Daffy Duck.
Duck feet on fire!
Also, what's up with that alleged pro-single parent Disney propaganda anyway? And people have clicked off the video already. I should have kept that one to myself. That's on me. So I don't know if this helps the situation at all, but Tailspin caught me at the right age, and that's when I started getting into Disney shows. But this video, which I should mention is my final remake of one of my older videos from over a year ago, is not really about that. We're here for Taz. Now, if you've seen the meme about the kid asking Michael Jordan why his parents named him after some popular shoes, the meme is I and I am meme. Before Taz-Mania was a real place in Australia, it was a cartoon as far as I was concerned. Then much later, when I first saw it on a map, I remember thinking that they absolutely nailed it with this show, and it was so popular that Australia went and named a whole island state after it. This was even bigger than Gundam and Wolverine statue levels of national pride. Look at the power of animation, I said. What I should really have said is look at the power of ignorance. But in my defense, we didn't learn much about Australia in school, so this was my first proper geography lesson on the land down under. That was terrible. Edit that out. But also, as a kid, I didn't really know how to separate English accents, so it took a few years for me to realize that this show wasn't taking place on some fictional island in the US like every other cartoon that was on TV. The US, I mean, not the fictional island. You get it. But there are some truths and a lot of lies in what I've just said, so I'll let you figure out what's what. But this was one of those famed Saturday morning cartoons that I would never miss, and much like my Dexter's Lab video, it confounds me that people do not talk about it very much. This is also a very layered show that I will try to approach a little differently from the Dexter's Lab video, even though the appeal and most of the positive aspects are similar across both shows. Now, off the bat, I will say that there was almost a rule with cartoons from the 90s and further back that, even though a show could be called a thing, it had to have different segments with B, C, and even D-list characters to pad out the show. If I was to guess the reason, I'd say variety shows were very popular in the early days of TV, so it probably carried over into these older cartoons. Think about Heathcliff and the Cadillac Cats, or the Tom and Jerry Kids Show, or the Animaniacs, and a plethora of other shows. So many of them did this. I could just play the Taz-Mania intro song here because it does a great job of listing all the bit players of the show, but Warner Bros. Doesn't seem to like it when I use songs and clips from their shows, so let's not do that. I'm just trying to stay copyright safe on this platform, so we'll get to them later. But regarding the song, every single time I hear it, it vividly takes me all the way back to Saturday mornings and cereal bowls in the 90s. From what I could find in my research, he was a very popular character in the original Looney Tunes era, and that eventually led to the creation of this show. Taz spun off from playing second fiddle to Bugs Bunny to leading his own show. Talk about a come-up. They even had an Easter egg reference in one of the earlier episodes where Taz was playing a video game that harkened back to that episode of the Looney Tunes. The basic premise of this show is that Taz lives with his family in this cool modern cave, and he gets into a lot of random escapades with a colorful cast of side characters. And much like Dexter as a character, I related to Taz because he enjoyed the same things that I enjoyed when I was young. Comic books, video games, constantly snacking, and playing outside. So staying faithful to his Looney Tunes origins, Taz could barely talk in structured sentences while everyone around him was very articulate, but he communicated with grunts and growls and lots of spitting. As far as I could tell, they all understood him fairly well, and communication was never that big of an issue, although his sister Molly was constantly taking shots at him about that.
But then some big brothers are capable of speaking in complete sentences.
He was a bit like a special needs child because he didn't conform to anything that the family did. The show did not ignore Taz's peculiarities though, like a lot of other cartoons would have done in the same instance, and just acted like it was normal that he doesn't speak like everyone else. And they had a whole thing about it in the first episode where his family addressed his wild behavior.
Ah, so sweet. So lovable. So what went wrong?
He's not my brother. It's all just a cruel hoax.
His father went through that episode trying to instill some manners in his son, which ended in some really funny payoff at the end. The dad was always super calm and collected all through, but judging by Taz's reaction when things fell apart, it's safe to say that this had definitely happened before. But at the core of this show was really a story about family and friendship where they tackled a lot of relatable topics with lots of warmth and humor. If you've been subscribed to me for any amount of time, then at this point you should know that I'm all about these wholesome vibes. The show may have been set in Australia, but the family dynamics were as relatable as anything I saw growing up. Taz's parents were like all the grown-ups I saw around me in my family as well as many of my friends' families.
Ma, don't we look lovely today? Nobody wears a muumuu like Mama.
Well, I do like to dress the part.
They were really affectionate and supportive of each other, which was the standard I grew up on, and it made me as well adjusted as I am today. Molly and Jake, who were Taz's younger siblings, were also extremely familiar and they felt very true to real life. Molly was a typical teenage girl
Teenagers. They make me sick.
who was into the type of boy bands who were popular back when I was a kid, and Jake was as real a child as you have ever seen on TV. He wasn't one of those smart-talking, quick-witted Hollywood children who would have an answer for everything. When put under pressure, he would break down and cry like most children would. For all the ridiculousness that was in this show, it had one of the more realistic and wholesome family dynamics of any cartoon I've ever seen. Remember when shows used to do that? Do you remember when animation wasn't so toxic? Anyway, I also liked Taz's uncle Drew, who would pop in occasionally. He was the stereotypical cool uncle who always elicited excitement from the family when he came around, even though his brother was not very partial to him. Their banter was always friendly though, and again, it felt really authentic. Let's just stamp that on this cartoon. Taz-Mania, very authentic. But all the relationships on this show were just world building 101. We have to buy into the different relationships and feel like the characters have a lot of history with each other, without the need for flooding the show with exposition or flashbacks. The gimmick with the brother was that they usually went on road trips that would always devolve into shenanigans, and it would pit them against some very random antagonists. But they were always fun, and they gave a lot of background into their sibling dynamic from their younger years, which often made reference to adventures from the past. The dad was always a very realistically different person when hanging out with his brother than the way he was at home with his family. You know how people change their energy, or do they call it code switching, when they're moving across different circles? Well, they did that here, and the character writing on the show in general was really high quality. Also, a thing I will mention about the dad was his love for OJ. Not Simpson, the juice. Not OJ the juice man. Orange juice. The dad loved orange juice. But like Garfield and lasagna or Sonic and chili dogs, that's always a great way to make an audience connect with a character through a shared understanding of a love for something as universally relatable as food. I might want a glass of orange juice right now actually. But I love those little details.
I hope you're drinking all your orange juice, honey. You want to have muscles like your father, don't you?
So, stepping out of the family to the rest of the supporting cast, they were mostly anthropomorphic animals who are indigenous to Australia. And with that, the show continues to teach us things. The first ones we met were Bull and Axel, who are a pair of alligators or maybe saltwater crocodiles because Australia. And they would try to capture Taz and ship him off to a zoo. And not for the money, no. They did it for
The children.
They really thought they were on a mission to do some good in the world. These were my second favorite side characters whose adventures always ended in pain. For them. But my favorite side character would definitely be Francis X. Bushlad. He was hilarious. As a rite of passage to manhood, he either had to achieve a hostile takeover of a Fortune 500 company or capture a Tasmanian devil. You'll never guess which one he chose. Most of the humor here was mined from showing these seemingly primitive mud people as sophisticated Wall Street banker types, complete with the condescending accents.
Oh, I say, Bushy, my boy, are you at all close to wrapping this up?
Any minute now, Father.
Now, I don't know if the social politics around this character would still hold up today, given Australia's history versus today's social climate, but Bush Lad cracked me up. He was an overly confident kid who talked a lot of stuff. He talked a lot of stuff.
Whatever doesn't kill me makes me stronger. That's Nietzsche. Do you know who Nietzsche is? I thought not. Do you know what separates we humans from you animals? Do you? Well, I'll tell you. It's reason, you furry lump. Reason that allows men to dominate you animals with your claws and teeth. You're so pitifully outmatched, it's almost tragic.
Everyone enjoys someone who talks that cash money stuff as long as they're entertaining. And I have watched their first encounter several times because it's always funny. I also really enjoyed the bush rats. If your house or fruit garden has ever been invaded by insects or vermin, that was these guys. I remember as a kid, we used to have a guava tree in the backyard and it was always invaded by ants. But the bush rats appeared in one of my favorite episodes where they invaded the family orange tree. As I previously mentioned, Taz's dad does not play when it comes to his orange juice. But the bush rats were really hungry, so this was a fun episode where you understood where both sides were coming from in their armed conflict. Then there were also
The Platypus Brothers!
who are inventors of sorts and always used Taz as a guinea pig for their experiments. Sometimes they would try to help him with a problem, but it was always to his own detriment. I vividly remember 2 episodes where they were trying to help him get this egg off a cliff, which I believe was the first episode I ever watched of this show, and there was another where they tried to help him with a tooth extraction. Not top of my list in terms of entertainment, but the first time I ever watched this show on TV was an episode of theirs, so I always have a fondness for them. Then I want to lump 3 characters together because I found them quite annoying. Didgeridingo was selfish, mistrusting of others, and very untrustworthy himself. But the cool thing about this dynamic was that almost all his grimy schemes against Taz would usually backfire on him. Man, this guy sucked. Then there was also Wendell T. Wolf, who was technically not a friend, but he was a very nagging nuisance who would stalk Taz to oblivion. A trigger warning to anyone who has excessively clingy friends. And third on the suckfest was Buddy Boar, who was really not popular and quite annoying. And even in watching it back, this one was very rough to listen to for an extended period of time.
Oh, look at us, Taz. We're acting like animals. I'm so ashamed of us.
Which the show eventually started acknowledging in a very self-aware manner. For someone with such a wholesome family, Taz's friends sucked big time. And speaking of sucking, there's a couple of episodes that I will always skip where his sister Molly took in this cat, and those episodes were always nightmare fuel for me when I was a kid. This was probably the foundation of my dislike for cats.
Beat it, stupid cat!
Then there was also Bushwhacker Bob, who was a horrible boss and a complete man baby, and his mom, who was a little less terrible. There were Taz's employers at Hotel Taz-Mania, which I keep wanting to call Hotel Transylvania. Maybe this is where Gendy got inspired. Shout out to the legend. But Hotel Taz-Mania is where Taz occasionally worked as a bellboy. The hotel also had Constance Koala, who was jovial and really sweet, as well as Mr. Thickley, who, the less said about his name the better. His role wasn't really defined, but he often appeared on the show whenever the script needed him. He was generally very positive but quite inept, and I just have to say, characters like him feel very tedious in both entertainment and real life. Actually, going back to Constance Koala, and don't go looking for this, but the internet would have preferred if she got the name Thickley, if you catch my drift. But moving right along, there were several other characters like the Kiwi, who was really fast like the Roadrunner and was in the more slapstick episodes. We actually used to argue as kids in school who was faster between the Kiwi, Speedy Gonzales, and the Roadrunner. I used to love those conversations in school. But there were also a lot of random other characters who appeared on the show to a lot of mixed success. They broke the fourth wall quite a bit in very innovative ways, and as I mentioned before, the overall writing on this show was quite clever. But this is the stuff I talk about all the time. There is no doubt in anyone's mind that this show was very inspired. The whole impetus behind creating a show about Taz was not just IP farming. It came from a genuine creative place where the writers had something to say. today. But I will also mention, this is the type of show that feels like it was made for adults first, with just enough in there for the kids as well. The concepts and humor were quite sophisticated for a Saturday morning cartoon, but that was the Warner Bros. And Looney Tunes standard back then. I mean, well, the Looney Tunes show from the 2010s was pretty good as well, but that seems to be the last laudable thing that came out of the Looney Tunes as a brand. One particular episode that I found interesting in this regard was when a backpacker came to study Taz's family of wild animals, and when contrasted with each other, she ended up looking like the wild animal herself, while the family tried to be very patient with her many peculiarities. Later, it turned out she had moved into the wilderness 20 years prior after being left at the altar with a church full of people on her wedding day. Ouch. Not exactly relatable material for a 6-year-old, but it cast a wide enough net to be entertaining for the whole family. I guess what I'm saying is, the writing still holds up, and if you want to go back to it, or even watch it for the first time, you will be entertained. All the voice acting is top shelf as well, so shout out to Rob Paulson and Jim Cummings, who did a lot of heavy lifting on the show by voicing multiple characters. But that's the time. I hope you enjoyed another trip down memory lane with me. Let me know what you enjoyed most about the show, or whether you'll give it a shot if you haven't seen it before. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.